Hey everyone, this is the second video in my three-part series. I haven't quite thought of a title just yet, but I'm sure it'll probably come to me after I make the videos. I want to give you a foundation of where I'm coming from as an individual, and so that as we move forward in these videos, you understand my mindset and again, just where I'm coming from. So a little bit about me is my mother was in the military. So I grew up in the military. I grew up around all walks of life. I've gotten along with all walks of life. I love culture. If anything, I love every food that comes along with the culture. That's the first thing I want to do is I want to taste your culture. So I've had friends from India, friends from China. I lived in Silver Spring, which is very diverse. And I would go from my Chinese friend's house eating sushi with her to eating curry with my friend from India. On the next level, we lived in an apartment complex. And so I love culture. I graduated in Montgomery County, which was also a very diverse community. And they had International Night, which again, all walks of life, Muslim, Hispanic, you name it, it was there. So very, very diverse upbringing. I have a very traditional public school education when it comes to understanding history. So what I mean by traditional is every point that we started, every time we talked about Black history, the starting point was always slavery. Then we moved directly to civil rights. And from civil rights, it just kind of fades out from there. And then the rest of the semester, the rest of the time was often spent learning about, Washington, George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Columbus, and everyone else. But those were the highlights. It was slavery and civil rights, and that's it. So it wasn't until much later in my life, unfortunately, that I became more and more curious about my history, about myself individually, my own family tree, and then going further from just the family tree to, I wonder on a greater scale, where does this story begin? So my own curiosity, my personal curiosity, is what led me to furthering my own education. It wasn't because it was provided to me by the public school. And so when I started teaching my kids about Black history, it did start out very traditional in nature. I started out the same point that I was taught to start out, and I highlighted the same points that I was taught to highlight. And it wasn't until, like I said, much later, and when I say much later, I'm talking much, much later, that I started, things just started not connecting, especially with being a homeschooler and being the only Black person in just about every setting that we went to for field trips. And we're going to these 15th, 16th, 17th century homes, and they're only talking about the white experience that they were having. And, this was the ballroom, and this was the room where they had tea, and this is, how they would make wool. And they're giving you the full white American experience on the tour. Meanwhile, you get none of the Black experience, which I understand is the deep, dark experience that nobody wants to talk about. It's like the redheaded stepchild that no one wants to mention. But for me, it felt like it was an elimination of a part of history. So, but not only an elimination, I didn't want to give my children a distorted view and perspective of their history that would make them feel inferior in any way. So, there was some learning experience in there for me. And so in part 3 of this series, what I would also like to share is maybe some methodology on how to teach your kids Black history. And so I'll share that in my next video. For this video, what I would like to address is, it is how to teach your kids, but it's more of the principles behind the how, not so much the what to teach, but maybe the way to teach it. So we'll get to the what to teach, but I think this provides a good groundwork for some guiding principles for the way to teach your homeschool student. Or, I'm sorry, not just homeschool, but this could also be if your child is in public school and you want to supplement some education at home to bring more understanding to them at home, you can also do that. So this is it's not just a white video, it's not just a Black video, it's not us versus them, and it's not a homeschool video versus a public school video. Again, I have a public school background. But I am a homeschool mom, so I'm kind of, getting the best of both. Well, I don't know if I'm getting the best of both worlds, but I'm going to share with you based on both worlds. So I received a question, an email from a mom who, actually, let me just read her question to you. How about that? Her question says, in regards to taking a proactive approach to decreasing racism in our world, I'm wondering if you can give me guidance on how or what I can do in my own home with my kids to make sure they do not have a judgmental attitude toward anyone as they get older. Everything I'm reading says to talk with your kids about racism, but when my kids look at how people are different, they think skin color is just another way God made us unique. Good job, Mom, because that is true. We have African American family members and many friends whom we love, capitalized all caps, love. So should I really be teaching them and opening their eyes about how nasty this world is? What should I be doing to guide them? I think that is a very good question. And I think in essence, a lot of parents may have that question. How do I open up this topic of racism, especially if they're little kids and you don't want to break their hearts with the nastiness of the world. And of course, you want to do it in phases and stages according to their maturity level. But specifically to this topic of racism, I'm going to give the way in this one, and then I'll give the what and some of the how in the next one. So I've listed 5 ways and things to keep in mind when you are teaching your kids Black history. The first thing is that racism is a sensitive subject and it is an emotionally evoking subject. That means that you, as well as your kids, are going to feel some kind of way about this subject. That means that they might be sad, angry, frustrated, confused. Why would people treat somebody like that? They might feel like they want to express it or get it out somewhere. But I want to encourage you, if your kids are responding that way to this subject matter, you're on the right track. That's great because they have the heart of the Good Samaritan. So I'm going to call this the Good Samaritan response. A Good Samaritan feels for the person that has been victimized. So if your child is having a compassion on victims that they see as they read the stories, that is a very good sign. It is a very healthy sign. I would only be worried if your child did not respond. If they were like the other 2 buyers in the Good Samaritan story. If they could just walk by or read that story and not feel something, then I would be worried. But if your child is like feeling sad and they're kind of broken up about it, that's a good and a healthy emotional response. Of course, we don't want to leave them hanging there, but at least we know that, okay, my kids see this with the right perspective and a healthy perspective. So that's the Good Samaritan response. The second thing to keep in mind is that though Black history has a lot of tragedy in it, it also has a lot of triumph in it. And when I first started teaching my kids, I actually used that phrase. And it was like I wanted to teach them, I only wanted them to hear the heroic part. I only wanted to hear them, I only wanted them to hear how great and successful Martin Luther King was. But I was so nervous about teaching them the struggle. I was so nervous about opening up this nasty and evil world to them of gosh, here we go, I have to have this talk with them. But I came up with this phrase and I said, I can't tell you about their triumph unless I tell you about their tragedy. So I first started out with, let me tell you about their tragedy, and then their triumph will mean so much more to you. And so, of course, they couldn't wrap their mind around it just with one book. We had to kind of keep going back over various stories and sometimes various books of the same story for them to really wrap their mind around what was the tragedy that was taking place and why these individuals were so great. What made Harriet Tubman so great? What made Frederick Douglass so great? Why are we celebrating them? Why are we dissecting their character and calling them strong and courageous and brave? So we had to understand the tragedy first. And of course, these tragedies get very, very deep and dark and very, very rated R, thankfully. And the deeper you get into the truth of African American history, it gets very dark. And so obviously you're not going to be sharing those rated R details with your kids, but there's enough information for them to get a good idea that no human being should be treated in this way. So what we want to do is highlight the triumph, but we also do have to describe the tragedy and just let them know, I got to tell you, nothing means anything unless there's trouble. Superman doesn't seem so super if there isn't some trouble for him to get into, if there isn't some trouble for him to rescue people out of. He's not great, right? You can call him Superman all you want, but if he's sitting on the couch just eating potato chips and there's no tragedy for him to rescue anyone out of, then what makes him so great, right? So you do have to explain why this person's triumph is so meaningful in history.